without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Beau Bauer. He is our biologist here at Nemours. He's been working here for over 10 years. He has a lot of good stories to share and has seen a lot of different students and research projects coming through. And so he's going to talk today a little bit about what is currently happening here at Nemours and some of the projects we've recently supported and the initiatives we're a part of right now. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Beau Bauer to talk to you about our research that's happening.
Thank you, Heather, for the lovely introduction. Thank you for those watching online. This is weird, but I hope you see me, can hear me okay. And I got a lovely audience in front of me here too. So thank you all for being here today. Okay, this is exciting. I love talking about the research we do here. As Heather said, this is been around a long time, seen a lot of great projects, great students over the years. And keep in mind, as I go through today's research roundup, this is just what's going on in 2025 right now, as of just 6 months into this year. And I think you'll be pretty impressed with the array and diversity of projects that we're currently supporting in a variety of ways. So let's just go ahead and get to it. So first off here, I'm going to highlight this gentleman here, Mr. Stephen Clements. He's a PhD student at Mississippi State University. So he stayed here for 3 years doing his field work for his dissertation. And he's currently, back finishing up his dissertation right now. So we've been supporting Stephen for a long time. And so what he's looking at, he's a waterfowl guy. This is some duck stuff here for my duck people out there. So let's get some background here first of all. There's not been a contemporary diet study, as in what do ducks eat in South Carolina, since like the 1970s. A lot's changed since then in our understanding of how ducks forage and what they're looking at. So Stephen is Stephen's doing a revised diet study, seeing what waterfowl are feeding on in various wetland habitats throughout South Carolina, whether it's the brackish marshes we see out here, planted and flooded corn, moist soil, freshwater wetlands, a variety of wetlands, and also, and I'll get some more details of this, not just what the ducks are eating, but how this scales up into larger conservation planning models. So you look at, say, some photography here of an impoundment like you see behind us. You kind of have, not all impoundments are the same, not everything's the same within an impoundment that's managed for waterfowl, these managed wetlands. So you have these open water areas, like when you look out here, there's a lot of cattails you see, but there's open water. You have different kind of foods that grow, kind of called submerged aquatics. And then these more red colors here, these are going to be kind of like, this is going to be your cattail stands, your rushes, your emergent vegetation. So you got different food resources in there as well. So Stephen's he's sampling all these different types of areas out there in these wetlands, seeing what food's available, and then seeing what the ducks are actually eating from what's available. And it's really interesting data. So some boring kind of, diagram stuff here. This is looking at, invertebrate seeds and vegetative kind of forages here. And you're seeing this among different duck species, blue-winged teal, gadwall, green-winged teal. Even these species have different preferences for their diet. Blue-winged teal are more heavy on vertebrates, gadwall more on vegetation components like your leaves and stems off of underwater plants, and green-winged teal are focusing more on seeds. So that's important for thinking about just diversifying the kind of foods that you're promoting in your wetlands for ducks. Not all ducks prefer the same things, right? They all have their little niches out there in the environment. And so, so not only, and I'll touch on this real quick, I don't have any slides to back this up right now. So not only is Stephen, he's taken ducks that people have shot, and hunters have shot, and he's looking at kind of what they're eating, doing, esophageal and gizzard kind of dissections. But he's also doing some novel DNA work using their feces and working with a professor at University of Texas, El Paso, who's a renowned waterfowl geneticist, and kind of pioneering right now using DNA techniques from fecal samples to see if it's matching up the food items from those DNA results from what he's actually getting from his actually cutting open and doing dissections for what ducks are eating. So that's going to be really great. Moving forward, that's a more cost-effective way to do these sorts of diet studies for waterfowl, and so he's pioneering all that. So let's move forward a little bit then from the DNA stuff. That gets really sciencey, and that is not my specialty at all. But let's talk about food again, what ducks eat, and how this works in a conservation planning. So if you know things like, when ducks are here and their food or their energy requirements while they're here, how many calories they expend a day in their basic life activities. If you know all that, you can start inputting models for what do ducks specifically eat. Again, going how different species have different preferences, the different habitats they use, whether they're impounded wetlands, natural marsh, freshwater, brackish wetlands, all these different stratifications. How much food's out there? We call biomass. And you can look at that and then know how much energy is in this food. So we know kind of how many calories are in certain types of plant seeds, invertebrates, that kind of stuff. And you can model out how many calories you have per hectare, or we can say acre, you know, if you want to use the metric stuff, but a kind of a density thing, how much food's on that landscape to support how many ducks you think you want to either, you know, eventually have your population objectives, how many you'd like to support, or where you're at now. And so you get these like duck use days or duck energy days, but essentially what this tells you is that for every acre in this open water habitat, say, you can support about 1,400 mallard-sized ducks per acre, given the amount of calories that are present there. I know this sounds like, oh my gosh, this is really getting into the nitty-gritty, but this is really important kind of stuff to know, because we start modeling out conservation planning, and this is an example from the black duck model, and what Stephen's actually working on is to improve data for this black duck model and scale it out to, you know, kind of like an average guild of dabbling ducks that we'll find in the southeast. But this is where, you know, right now the black duck model is kind of already in existence and is kind of tweaking off of this model. But what this shows is that areas on the landscape where you may have opportunities, that's in purple right here, that really need restoration to enhance the wetlands and also protection to keep them from being developed. In the southeast, we look pretty good. We got a lot of green spaces here, which means we have high quality wetlands. The priority in the southeast is going to be protecting these wetlands, usually through, you know, conservation easements and those sorts of things. So again, kind of looking at just one student we're supporting and the kind of work that he's doing here and how the inputs and results from his work are going to have landscape, you know, flyway scale ramifications here is super exciting. This is work that has not been done in the Atlantic flyway to the degree it has needed to be done to. It's pretty well fleshed out in the Mississippi and Central flyways, but not so much the Atlantic flyway. So super exciting that the soon-to-be Dr. Clements is doing this work, is going to really help advance this kind of conservation planning forward, just given his research here. So, all right, we'll go to the next one now. Exit Suthar, another PhD student of Clemson University. Years ago, you know, myself and the former waterfowl biologist for DNR, you know, we're going back and forth about counting ducks in wetlands and how hard it is. You think it'd be easy to go out there, drive around and count ducks, but when you're doing that, you're disturbing birds, they're getting up, they're flying. You really don't get precise counts of anything. And it's like one day drones will be the way to do this. And it's going to get to a point where those sensors and everything are small enough and cost efficient enough where drones will be able to do our waterfowl surveys for us. And the future is here, my friends. So Exit Suthar, you know, Clemson University, specifically their waterfowl center, the Kennedy Waterfowl and Wetland Center, is pioneering the use of using drones to survey not just ducks, but, you know, water birds in general that use these old rice fields out here, these managed tidal impoundments, as we call them today. So let's look at some of the cool stuff that his drone can do. So we're looking at an impoundment up in Georgetown that's all a banana water lily in this impoundment, actually. So that's just a still photo from this drone taken about 30 meters up in the air. So you can see some little black spots in there, like, oh, yeah, okay, cool, there's birds out there, I can see them. But check this out. He's got thermal on this drone. And so now you can start seeing heat signatures. And this is a whole game changer. Even in broad daylight, you can, you know, you get way more contrast and definition for what's actually out there using the thermal. And when it comes to detecting, you know, birds like in thick cover and things like that, something that you couldn't see from a dike or a berm driving around with binoculars, this drone's picking this stuff out using, again, this thermal capability here. So it's really great. He can pre-program his survey routes into the drone, hits a button, and the drone starts flying transects across properties, constantly collecting thermal and color imagery. And he goes back afterwards and the computer system kind of stitches all this together and then can have all these images to look at and can go through and start counting ducks. And the resolution for photography is so great. Not only is he just counting just birds in general, but he knows he can tell the species of different birds. So now we're getting a really good idea of our species richness out there, how many different types of species, along with our abundance, just our raw counts of those numbers of birds. And I'll show you some really cool video here too. Just it's fun watching these drone flights. But here's that same pond with all banana water lily. And I think there were like 4,000 ringneck ducks out there that day. So all those ducks you're seeing are ringneck ducks. Now, what's really great about this, and I kind of go back to this point I made when I was having this conversation with the retired state wildlife biologist a number of years ago, is that disturbing ducks when they're trying to count ducks defeats the purpose. Notice that this drone's flying around. These ducks are not afraid of that drone. So you're not disturbing the birds. They're not flying away. They're still foraging and swimming around and acting like ducks. So this is a great way, again, that we can count these birds without affecting their behavior, especially affecting their behavior in a bad way, right? And so not just ducks. Now, going back to that thermal capability, Exit and I were wondering if we could find secretive marsh birds in thick, kind of emergent cover marshes. And well, let's just watch this video here. And this was our first attempt at finding a secretive marsh bird. And so now we're seeing this little red blob moving around. Oh, here it goes. So that starts to act a little funny. And you can tell it's a little rail species, okay? But okay, what kind of rail species is this? Watch me walk around for a little bit more. There's this thing so interesting. I think eventually he'll do a big loop up this way. There we go. But I won't hold you here much longer than that. There he goes, walking around. So, okay, what kind of rail species is this? So now we can flip on that color camera again. And check this out. We were able to see that rail that we were looking at with thermal using the color camera and zooming down. So that is a Sora, S-O-R-A, Sora rail. Tiny little rail species. Again, secretive marsh birds. We say that it means they don't like to be seen. They run around these thick clumps of vegetation, particularly your rail species, and they're really hard to survey. Usually, you got to do what we call call playback surveys. You'll ride around, you play their calls, and you hope that something responds, and then you can just tick off your data sheet presence or absence. So this is pretty cool here, knowing that you can detect these things with thermal. And maybe even get a chance for a nice close-up shot for identification here. This is fascinating. I've never seen footage like this before. A tiny little rail species running around, unbeknownstly being filmed by a drone overhead. And I think this drone, that day, we were about maybe 30 feet instead of 30 meters overhead. We fly a little closer for the rails than we do with ducks. Anyway, fascinating work here. Another really cool component of what Exit's working on as well. And again, kind of going back to hold the slide here for a bit. Going back to the traditional techniques of surveying secretive marsh birds using call playback surveys, is that he's also developed a way to deliver what's called automated recording units, kind of these little independent recorders that you can put out in the field that are resistant to the weather and everything. But he's rigged this device of like pool noodles and wire with these little recording units in them that he can fly out with his drone and use like a little ring dropping thing that people use for like engagement stuff or something, and like drop these, almost like parachute in these automated recording units into like far off, hard to reach places of marshes. And he can do those secretive rail surveys with these deployed automated recording units that he did it with the drone, and then he can pick them back up with the drone and bring them back. I mean, this is really high speed, cutting edge technology here that Exit's pioneering. And it's opening doors for ways to conduct this kind of research into the future. Really fun stuff. If you kind of think about the way Ukrainians are dropping like mortar rounds and grenades into Russian trenches using like commercial drones, like that's what Exit's doing with these automated recording units. Really cool. And yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. So next we'll move on to, and I like to say too, Exit, as well as this young lady here, Marion Boucher, they're both Nemours fellows, so they're on our full fellowship program. We support them in tuition and a lot of other ways. And this is great to have our name affiliated with these students as well. So here's Marion Boucher, again, another PhD student, Clemson University, our Canadian crocodilian biologist, right? She's an absolute rock star. She's studied crocodilian species all around the world. And so now she's doing her PhD work on the American alligator, specifically also doing some diet stuff, kind of what Stephen Clements is doing, kind of seeing what these things are eating out there. That hasn't been done in a while as well. But in that process, specifically, she's looking at the toxin loads of these animals, microplastics, and we call her PFAS chemicals here, forever chemicals, the stuff that you would treat for fire retardants or waterproofing things, chemicals like that that persist in the environment. This has become a really big issue lately in the wildlife and human health world, just the amount of plastic on the landscape and how this may trickle in into our lives, right? And so here's Miriam doing her thing. We're catching alligators. We're flushing their stomachs. We're doing a process called lavaging, but we're making them, regurgitate their food. And with that, she'll get the microplastics and things. She sifts through all these contents, taking tissue samples too for toxin loads. And what's really cool is this device here, this jaw prop, is a really neat contraption that she developed, ran the specs and all the testing through a Clemson engineering lab. And so when you're doing something like trying to see how many plastics are in an animal, the less plastics you can use in that process, the better. So, the jaw prop here is all metal and quartz, so it's not going to, further contaminate. Of course, we got to use some plastic stuff like piping, but the less we can use, the better. Traditionally, you would put like a piece of PVC pipe in an alligator's mouth and tape it around there and do this kind of work like that. So she developed this jaw prop device, has already got a peer-reviewed scientific article out on this within like a year of her study, right? That's really working hard to be in the middle of your field work, doing all this stuff, and then to already crank out a peer-reviewed paper in one of our profession's top journals, the Wildlife Society Bulletin, is very, very impressive right there. So great things from Miriam. Not all of our students are Clemson students, of course, Stephen at Mississippi State University, but here's another Clemson student, Ty Tobias. He's in his second field season now working with us. We're supporting him with housing and access to field sites and things like that. And so when we talk about, if you're familiar with, the old rice fields, as we call them, or managed tidal impoundments, a lot of the research done on these systems have been bird focused, specifically waterfowl for the most part, because that's what these systems are managed for. But other water birds, your wading birds, shorebirds, things like that. No one's really done an in-depth like herpetological survey of these systems. So that's your reptiles and amphibians. It's a fancy word for reptiles and amphibians. And so Ty is tackling this one. Okay, he's looking at these old rice fields and the sorts of reptile and amphibian assemblages that live in these rice fields. And he has too much fun out there, I think. Yeah. People who are into reptiles and amphibians, I found, are really, really into reptiles and amphibians. And Ty is no exception. He's doing great work out there. He works so hard. Obviously, these are like places those people don't want to be in like June and July, right? And he's out there just crushing it. He's got a couple undergrads working with him too, and he's putting them through the ringer. Really hard field work. You're in it, you're dirty. And he's coming up with some really great stuff. He's got a lot of different techniques and methods he uses for detecting, again, various frogs, salamanders, lizards, snakes, all those sorts of reptiles and amphibians, right? But all those have different ways of capturing or surveys, and he's kind of utilizing a full suite of methodology to survey what sorts of little critters like that use these old rice fields. I may be going a little too fast here, everybody. So now we're going to go into our eco pasture initiative a little bit. So in April 2024, we introduced cattle to Nemours. So our director, Dr. Bridges, gives a standalone presentation just on this topic. So I'm not going to go into all the variations and just the whole background of this, but in a nutshell, what we're looking at doing here is replicating the effect of mega herbivores on the landscape. And I say mega herbivores prior to Europeans arriving, to the United States, especially the Southeast. Our coastal plains were dominated by herds of, bison and elk and stuff like that. That was a big part of our landscape. And of course, that's all gone. But with, in the background, early colonizers had introduced some cattle on the landscape. And so these piney wood cattle specifically, these were evolved from the original cattle the Spaniards dropped off in Florida, have evolved on this landscape. They've been used primarily in standard livestock, pasturing kind of applications. But since they do so well in the Southeast, they're really resistant to parasites. They can eat a bunch of garbage out there. They can have their babies out there without us, being involved in that process. These not genetically modified, industrial cattle. They're pretty low key to take care of. So this is great to, a great species to experiment with this and trying to see the effects of cattle as mega herbivores on our landscape in terms of how that affects our bird life out here, plant life, soil health, and a whole different other aspects of this. So you can look at this other ways too, like alternative revenue sources for landowners, farm to table kind of initiatives too. So they all have collars on them so we can track where they are, where they're going. We haven't really gotten to the whole, we can actually do digital or virtual fencing with these collars. And it'll, essentially shock these animals if they get to that where we've drawn a virtual fence. We haven't really played around that too much yet, but a lot of potential here and how we can use that to rotate cattle in different areas and focus them on different areas in the woods at different times of the year to try to achieve some habitat goals, maybe clearing out some thick, cool season pasture grasses that would really hinder, say, quail nesting or turkey nesting. These cattle can forage down these cool season grasses and allow more competition from our native grasses and understory, wildflowers and legumes that would be better for ground nesting birds, quail specifically. And that's kind of like a focus, I think, for us too with this is that can we improve some quail habitat possibly, where you've seen cattle used like this before, where I've seen this before in South Carolina. The response from quail is unbelievable. So maybe that's one of those things that we've been missing, and this, trying to bring quail back on the landscape is utilizing herbivory from cattle to make their habitat better. A lot can we go on to this. We're just starting all this stuff out. But as we look at where we are grazing at, 263 acres we've set aside, divided up, between two separate pastures. We call it the east and the west pasture, very creatively there. And we have a bunch of long-term surveying and monitoring plots within there where we can do vegetative surveys, invertebrate surveys, songbird point counts, some very general stuff like that. Already have a professor at Clemson named Lydia O'Halloran, Dr. O'Halloran, and so she has some students been working out here already, doing some measurements on some basic soil health, soil characteristics, soil moisture, some atmospheric and environmental variables as well. So yeah, some very good basic environmental baseline data before we really get cranked up with the heavy research going on with all this. And now this leads me to Michael Belanger. Okay, so he's in the audience today. Michael, hey. So in August of 2023, right?
Yeah.
2023. Michael joined us as an intern, part of a pilot initiative to partner with other organizations and universities. So this kind of program is working with Clemson University, Ducks Unlimited, Texas A&M University, and the Welder Wildlife Institute out in Texas. Very similar to Nemours and how it's structured, but their focus is a lot of cattle stuff, where we've usually been waterfowl. But regardless, it was a great opportunity to bring some new students here. And so Michael was one of those first interns, part of that exchange program. And so Michael began collecting the initial kind of plant data prior to us getting the cattle. So he's been part of this process from the beginning. Thankfully, Michael agreed to come back last August, 2024, and he's been with us ever since in kind of like a technician role, leading a lot of the data collection going on here at Nemours since then, but really focusing on these aspects with the eco pasture work. So Michael is training up our new summer interns, and even better, Michael will be a graduate student as well, starting this fall. Of course, at Clemson University, working with Dr. O'Halloran, and don't know exactly what all he'll be digging into. I'm sure plants will be involved, knowing Michael. But again, one of those great stories, someone brought in as an intern, just phenomenal employee, phenomenal young man, and comes back in a more professional capacity with us. Does a great work, and when it came time to look for a student for a project, he was a no-brainer. So that's just a really good model for us in developing young professionals. And with that, we go on to our summer research interns. So these are Michael's children this summer, and he's doing a great job training them up. So here we have Harris Ayers from Clemson University and Mason Reed from the University of South Carolina, Beaufort, our local sand shark here. And so this is some great stuff. They're out in the field. So what they're doing right now are vegetation surveys. Right here, Mason is, and some of our cattle pasture habitat there. Here's Mason inspecting red-cockaded woodpecker cavities for nesting activity. And then Mason's trying not to have too much fun here, being taught how to catch alligators by Michael, or Harris down here. And then right here, Harris is so what this is talking about, invertebrate kind of sampling and everything with the cattle stuff. So what he's got here is a dung beetle trap. That's a nice juicy bag of fresh cow dung right there, and that's supposed to attract dung beetles. So this, it's kind of, you're going to have these big cattle out there. Maybe even get some dung beetles with that. That'd be kind of cool. And well, let's see what we have. Meet the dung beetles, right? And so now we have officially documented 2 species of dung beetles have now been documented on our property, in response to these cattle being out here. I think this is really cool. Those things like, I wonder if we'll get dung beetles. And by gosh, our interns and Michael have got a great system for surveying these little fellows out there and trapping them. So yeah, we have the Carolina dung beetle, definitely the most common of the ones we've collected. But this cool guy here, the rainbow scarab, I couldn't believe that we have something like this. So really, really, really fascinating. I love seeing new things like this out there. And of course, it's a great opportunity for these interns to really get a lot of good experiences. Not only are these interns, by the way, helping out with stuff going on here, but all these other graduate students that we've seen, and there's some more coming up, they get to go out there with them as well and participate in their studies and data collection and really get a wide breadth of experiences out there, different methodologies and different habitat types, and how to do all this work. So I hope they're having fun. All right, so here we go. A non-Clemson graduate student, Kerrigan Larkin at Kennesaw State University. So she has a project looking at generally bats. Okay, I'm not a bat person. I don't know a whole lot about bats because I have young children. I go to bed early. But so she's from Kennesaw State. But what she's looking at is how different urban development gradients maybe it may affect bat foraging assemblages. So she's got different study sites in the coast here. Nemours obviously being like the most rural of her study sites, and other ones being more developed, high density communities and that kind of stuff. And just comparing what kind of bat assemblages are out there and how they're foraging and things. So what you do, when I talked about those automated recording units that Exit was putting out in the marsh for secretive marsh birds, secretive water birds, similar technology exists for bats, right? So this is another automated recording unit. Kerrigan's got propped against a tree, and your data looks like this. So bats fly around and make a bunch of weird noises that we can't hear, but they're out there, and you can identify what sorts of bats you have. This is all this crazy software. I don't know anything about this stuff, but this is cool. And you can run, those audio files through various types of software. These are all species codes for all the different species of bats that's being represented in that sonogram right there. This is the first bat work that we've had done at Nemours. So I'll be really interested to see what species that Kerrigan picks up out here. Yeah, really, really cool stuff. Here's another one of our students we're supporting, providing some housing for the summer and a place to do this research. Gino Cassisi, he's a master's student at Carolina Coastal University. I believe our first Carolina Coastal student as well. And Kerrigan will be our first Kennesaw State too. So if nobody's familiar, by the way, if the guy looks crazy to you, he's also a former infantry Marine like I am. So he seems to be in his natural habitat right now. So if you all are not aware, there's something out there, and I'm going to butcher this, but this is a fungus disease that's a problem with snakes right now. The snake fungal disease would kind of be your generic term for it. But as you can see, this fungus can really have some bad effects on snakes, and ultimately, this chronic will lead to death eventually. That snake will not be able to efficiently find food and eat. So snake fungal disease, yeah, it's an issue. It's out there. And so Gino specifically is looking at this fungal disease in eastern cottonmouths. Of course, being a Marine, he has to find something venomous to play with, not just a rat snake or something, right? So he's swabbing these things, and so he's kind of looking at also just how these snakes behave. If they're infected, is their behavior different from being infected? Are they spending more time basking out in the sun, trying to get rid of that fungus? And does that kind of basking behavior, lead to exposure to more predation events? And, so there's a whole lot of ecology and behavioral kind of, components for these infected snakes. So, specifically doing this on cottonmouths here. So I know it's a very common snake, in this area, right? So it's good to know about that. And so yeah, he's done some, again, really interesting stuff. I mean, really interested in the prevalence rate, like how often he's encountering snakes with this fungal disease out here. But again, it's all kind of new stuff that we're learning here. And we'll move on to another Nemours classic here, Ottawa Fiera. So Ottawa here, he was Stephen Clements's technician for a number of years for Stephen's dissertation field work. Again, one of those students that came through here, did great work, did great stuff, and so he was offered an opportunity to pursue his master's degree again at Clemson University at the Kennedy Waterfowl Center. And so Ottawa is going to be looking, again, going back into this aspect of like microplastics and these things in our environment, right? They're accumulating probably at a greater rate than we can comprehend. And so with all of the work Stephen has done, we have a freezer full of like duck gizzards and stomach contents and things like that. So it's a no-brainer for somebody like Ottawa, who did a lot of that work with Stephen, to go through those samples again. And this time, instead of looking for bugs and seeds and vegetation matter, he's looking for the microplastics now. Choosing green-winged teal is one of the most abundant, duck species that we winter down here in South Carolina. It's a very important game species, one of the top harvested birds. So again, choosing it as a candidate species, that's why specifically for green-winged teal. Very abundant, highly sought after as a hunting bird. They eat really well, by the way. And so that's what's specific to green-winged teal there. And there's a lot of them. So, and you got a lot of samples for this. So yeah, going back to microplastics thing, in between alligators and waterfowl, this can be good indicators of what's in our wetlands that we may not want to have in our wetlands, right? So there we go. Again, it's cool that, Otto was with us as a technician, or with Stephen for a technician for so long, and we get to, support him again as a master student now. And last but not least, I'm going to wrap up here pretty early then, so I have plenty of time for questions today, okay? All right, so our last kind of like an in-house project here, working with a waterfowl professor at the State University of New York, ESF. His name's Dr. Mike Schumer, a very well-known waterfowl biologist, waterfowl professor. And him and I were talking a while back, about just duck migrations, breeding grounds, and wintering grounds, connecting the dots. There has not been really substantial, robust research that kind of indicates where our ducks that we, have here during the wintertime, where are they coming from? So if you look at, the North America's migration routes, very generally we have the Pacific Southway, the Pacific Flyway, the Central Flyway. The Mississippi Flyway is the big one. This gets all the attention. This is where most of the ducks are coming through. Mississippi Flyway is like the duck flyway. But we have the Atlantic Flyway, obviously, and this is the weird one. Nobody knows what really goes on the Atlantic Flyway. It's always been the backwater of flyways and flyway research. Do our ducks in South Carolina, are there breeding grounds in, eastern Canada, or are they over here in the prairie pothole regions of Canada and flying over the Appalachian Mountains and getting here? It's probably a little column A and column B, the extent of which, or for which species specifically, we really don't know. But something that we can do, though, is use a process called stable isotope analysis. And so what this means is that as these ducks are in different geographic regions throughout their annual cycle, say on the breeding grounds up here, or on their wintering grounds down here, as they are foraging in these different areas, and at the same time, they're molting and reproducing new feathers, various elements in the environment, we're talking, your carbon, your nitrogen, these sorts of things, as they are synthesized into feather production, they can leave signatures that you can kind of trace back to where that bird came from geographically. The latitudinal precision of this is pretty good, actually. It's just the longitudinal one is what makes this, that kind of analysis difficult. And again, the science behind all this is way, way beyond anything that I really understand. But I do know that a lot of people use this sorts of technology, this kind of analyses for various other projects, especially with birds. It's a great way to do it. And so working with Dr. Schumer, we're talking about how to connect the dots between breeding grounds up here, or maybe over here, and wintering grounds here. How do we connect these dots, right? So the first thing we did was just, I worked down here coordinating with, our own staff, but other, with DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, and private partners in the Ace Basin and in Georgetown, and able to collect this wings from birds that people had hunted, right? So wing sample collection, and send all those off to Dr. Schumer. And we had a very enthusiastic and overwhelming response this year. So our 3 candidate species for this project, green-winged teal, American widgeon, and gadwall. Again, these are kind of just based on what are, very popular, very abundant birds on the landscape as a whole. And yeah, had a really great response for samples we collected from these 3 different species in the Ace Basin in Georgetown as well. So what needs to happen next with something like this is going to be a lot of banding efforts. The Yaqui Wildlife Center in Georgetown, a DNR property, they did some winter banding this year. So the banding, and well, we try to do some banding here as well. We got to it too late in the season. Hopefully the next biologist will keep this project going. So get some bands on birds. That just helps kind of complete the cycle of stuff there. We can start to refine, the stable isotope stuff with some like real, band data from where these birds were at this point in time, right? And that's just going to help give us a better picture of how these birds are moving across the landscape throughout their entire annual cycle, connecting the dot between wintering grounds and breeding grounds. Really, really critical kind of this basic waterfowl work there, but has not, really been put to the test in the Atlantic flyway. So again, great work with Dr. Schumer. And if you are a duck person, if you're here in the audience or listening online, if you like ducks, you like hunting ducks, Dr. Schumer, and I will shamelessly plug his podcast, the Fowl Weather Podcast, is phenomenal. To have a scientist like that doing a waterfowl podcast, that he has a great technique for predicting migrations. He says you'll know where the birds are before they know where they are. But he's really great. A lot of good information. In the off season, it's not hunting season, he has a lot of great scientists and students on there talking about their research. So it's a great way to learn about ducks and duck habitat, duck migration, duck biology from an actual waterfowl scientist, and not some fly-by-night podcaster. So I will shamelessly plug his program. And when I say next biologist, for those who are not aware, next week is my last week at Nemours after 12.5 years. So this is my final and last presentation, research roundup, and it's just been an absolute blast over the years. Being part of this community, being part of this team, serving this community, and just want to thank all of our supporters out there, all of our staff who I worked with, all of our colleagues, everybody online. Thank you for watching today. It has been such an honor to be y'all's biologist for so long, and I have plenty of time for questions now, so we can open it up for that. Sir.
So where do you go next?
Cincinnati, Ohio.
And doing what?
Retiring.
No.
Yeah.
Is this typically the number of students you support a year? Or
We're about at capacity right now, which is exciting. We've over my tenure here, we've had peaks and valleys, just depending on how busy, say, I may be to support students at a time, or where our resources are at for different projects. But right now is a fun time where we have the opportunity and resources. We have better housing now. We have a lab facility for students to work at, so we can support a good number of students right now. We're really testing that theory, and we've been at capacity for a while, but it's so exciting. There's so many students out here running around doing some amazing projects. We got these great interns learning so much. So yeah, this is about peak right now. Yeah, and spring and summer typically your busier field seasons. Most students have to go back in the fall and take classes and do that kind of stuff too. They can't live in the woods forever. Do we want to stop sharing on the screen? Okay. So this should just be the you just looking at me now, Sarah?
Yes, we're just looking.
Okay, great. Any more questions?
I just wonder, do you see more projects for the farmers, more research in the future?
For farmers?
For things to
Like the
help
eco
farmers?
pasture.
I may not be the best person to answer that, but there's definitely pathways for that. Like, so when it comes to the cattle here, like my focus has been strictly wildlife habitat. But obviously there's components of this where, especially say the timber industry is really starting to crash in South Carolina. So for those landowners that rely on timber and that's starting to go away, maybe introducing cattle as a way to not only improve habitat in a sustainable manner, but that could also be another income stream to sell those cattle as well. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was here once before and there was, I guess a graduate student doing some research that had helped farmers, be more efficient in what they did. And I thought, oh, that's fascinating. I think-
Yeah. So we don't do a lot of like farming on the property. So there's really not, a lot of nexus points there for us to relate our wildlife research or farming practices.
Mhm.
But Clemson Extension, it would be the go-to for that kind of information. They do a lot of that. Any online questions? Sure.
Yeah, can you talk some about how you identify, recruit, screen, qualify candidates to come here and do work?
Sometimes, sometimes you put out an advertisement and you have some resumes to choose from. And you try to, select the most qualified candidate from those resumes, of course. Other times we'll have, programs like the exchange program that Michael was a part of, where the universities and other partners are selecting people from their pool of candidates and sending them our way. And that works out really great. And, other times, again, it could be, we got a grad student working here, and they've got a technician with them or something, an undergrad, and it's like, wow, that person's really got it, right? They've got something special. They've got some curiosity. They're asking some questions. And maybe this is a good person to, because we always have something in the pipeline. What's next? What's next? This research will open these doors. We'll have more questions from this that need to be answered. And so kind of, having a pipeline like that is very useful. It's like, okay, someone came to us somehow. They did really, really well. Let's kind of keep pushing them through our system, maybe. I don't know if I really answered your question because we attract so many different, just universities and institutions and just other friends and colleagues and stuff that have, great, opportunities or references or recommendations for interns. And it's just, sometimes you get in, sometimes you don't, but it's the funnest part of the job though, because the interns are, as these guys know, they do all the fun stuff, and teaching them all these things is a lot of fun. Some come in really great. When I came here as an intern, I didn't know anything. So, and this is a great place to, and sometimes I prefer that. Sometimes I want somebody here that's really green to give them that chance. You're not going to get anywhere else. It's a very competitive field. It's going to be a hard time doing with the Fish and Wildlife Service, just an undergrad degree. It's going to be a hard time going into like, DNR as a biologist or even as a technician without a master's degree anymore. So to be able to, have these interns here and they can train, they can learn, they've got a long leash when they're out here, as long as they behave, to explore their curiosities and refine their skills. And then that usually sets them up for a lot of success going down the road. Because the Fish and Wildlife Service or DNR seeing like Nemours on a resume, that carries some weight with it. Did I answer your question at all, or?
Oh, yeah, no, I guess my follow-on question is, why did you laugh?
I laugh because
Sounds like there's some stories.
there's been so many ways that interns have come to us, and I was one of those a long time ago as well. And it's just like, I don't know if there is rhyme or reason to it. We just seem to attract some really interesting people, with the exception of myself. Anybody online? Any questions? Okay.
So you mentioned that the forestry industry was ready to crash. What do you expand on that?
And it's just looking at the amount of mills that are open anymore, and supply and demand things. It's just been a slow burn for you're just not getting what you used to get out of your timber if you're relying on that to maintain your large tract of land, like a lot of these old plantations are. And am I saying it's all doom and gloom? No, I'm not saying that at all, but it's definitely been, trajectory wise, this downward slope with, the timber industry. And, and at some point, people may have to start thinking about how they're going to diversify ways to earn money with their land. And cattle could be a really great way to still meet all those other objectives you have that land for, whether it's for forestry or hunting, or you just enjoy, wildlife viewing, like great. But maybe cattle will be another component of that to help you maintain that property as as livestock and something you can sell. And it's, but still do everything in a sustainable way, just diversifying your revenue.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess it's just not in demand as much, the timber.
I think it's in demand. It's just a lot of bottlenecks in between. Yeah.
We did get a question online. Can you describe more about the work being completed through collaborations and partnerships? What opportunities do you see for understanding the American woodcock?
Oh, wow, okay. So the question was,
Can you describe more about the work being completed through collaborations and partnerships?
All right. all right, describe more of the work being completed through collaborations and partnerships. Just about everything we do is a collaboration and partnership. We can't, I mean, we have a lot of great resources here, right? But there's still so much bandwidth, especially employee wise. And we don't have all the knowledge here either. I mean, believe it or not, I don't know everything about everything. I know, right? Like, yeah, digest that for a second amongst yourselves, but there's other skill sets out there, right? And there's also ways to leverage things. So one of the best things we can do, like working collaboratively with partners like, Clemson University, obviously, right? Clemson can do, tuition waivers for grad students and things like that. And that goes a long way towards supporting students. But what we can do to leverage all this as well is that we can provide housing, we can provide a vehicle on site here. We have a laboratory for students to work in. And so you have those other sorts of resources that you can add to the bundle there. It really goes a long way towards supporting, and that's hard. When you're a graduate student in this field and you're doing field work, finding a place to sleep is really difficult. Having a vehicle you can get up and down these dirt roads in, and not your, little Prius or Camry or something that an undergrad or grad student can afford, is not going to get, up and down these roads here in Nemours. So again, so that's a great way right there. Just using what we're really good at. We have space, we have areas for people to study, we have places to sleep and work and all that. Is a great way to get things done. Another way that, work gets done with partners is identifying problems as well. Sitting down with your colleagues and partners, and kind of just doing a hot wash. Like, what are the issues? What are we as a collective looking at the horizon right now on, as far as what's the emerging threats? What are some things maybe to be resilient towards? What are some new questions and the new things out there that we just don't know much about? And kind of working in that kind of just collaborative framework of just asking questions amongst each other. Hey, what's going on? And then seeing like, okay, wow, that is going to be a serious issue. Who do we have here that can help, help answer this? Who can support the research? Who can provide study sites? Who can conceptualize how study design may work? Who may be the expert at analyzing these sorts of data? There's different ways to do all this kind of work. Again, not all of that is housed in my brain, or this will, or even one single person here at Nemours. So that's a really, again, just talking to people, having great partners. Everything we do is collaborative in a partnership with somebody. I hope that answers the question out there. The other part was.
The other part was, what opportunities do you see for understanding the American woodcock?
Opportunities for understanding the American woodcock. Well, there's been a lot of research on the American woodcock in the last, maybe 5 years plus. Even in South Carolina, working with the Rough Grouse / American Woodcock Society and other partners. I think University of Maine with putting out satellite transmitters on woodcock throughout the Southeast. So that's been done in Georgia and South Carolina, to my knowledge. So I guess to further understand that species, again, kind of going back to we talked about the waterfowl earlier, connecting dots between the migratory routes, breeding grounds, wintering grounds, those sorts of aspects, and then and understanding those habitats that those woodcock are using better throughout those different times of their year, and how to maybe manage or promote habitat in those areas where we know they're migrating through, or areas that that they occupy, and it's expanding habitat management in those areas to bolster their numbers. But yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there. Of course, again, talking about those right partners, right? Who's in the South that somebody in North can work with collaboratively to do the field work and collect the data, and ultimately crunching the data. That's where it gets hard. Is getting the people to get all those numbers together and analyze these data sets. So a lot of potential there. A lot of potential there to further understand the American woodcock. And we have some here, if anybody would like to come study in here.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So I work for NRCS, and I do have a couple of landowners who are interested in the eco pasture. They call it civic pasture, but they have typical cattle, but you wouldn't say like that. I'm fairly new, but they're wanting to learn more about how they can both have a timber portion and then also have grazing portion.
Yeah.
And I haven't found very many opportunities for them to learn about that. Do you all ever offer like any specific training or tours on something like that?
That will be, and I'm speaking out of turn, don't let me, Dr. Bridges, but I think that's all going to be part of this, our overall eco pasture initiative. And a big component is that's as we start dialing things in and then working, probably, especially Clemson Extension.
Okay.
And Extension's done a lot with silver pasture. So silver pasture is like specifically integrating livestock and timber for the production of both livestock and timber. And so when we say eco pasture here, that's more of a holistic approach for us. Like our main objectives are not producing livestock, not producing trees, but overall ecological integrity and ecological wildlife benefits. So that's why we're using the word eco pasture here. But again, nested in silver pasture as well. So yeah, there will be workshops coming up as we learn more, as we get that team together that can deliver that information. In the meantime, for those landowners looking to learn more, Clemson Extension right now is still probably going to be the best source of knowledge on silver pasture specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
If there are no more questions, I want to thank everybody for coming out then and learning about some of the research projects we have going on here. Feel free for the people that are in the building to stay behind and ask Beau any other questions. For the people that tuned in online, thank you for joining us, and we'll be reaching out later. So thank you all, and feel free to come up and chat with us.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.